This is Reading Wikipedia, where I read Wikipedia. This is a Game Boy. The Game Boy is an 8-bit handheld game console developed and manufactured by Nintendo. It was the first handheld in the Game Boy family. That's why we call it the original Game Boy. First released in Japan on April 21st, 1989, North America 3 months later, then in Europe in September 1990. It was designed by the same team that developed the Game & Watch series of handheld electronic games and several Nintendo Entertainment System games, those being Gunpei Yokoi, Satoru Okada, and Nintendo Research and Development 1. Nintendo's second handheld game console, the Game Boy combines features from both the NES home system and Game & Watch hardware. At launch, it was sold as a standalone unit in Japan or bundled with Super Mario Land. Or, no, Wikipedia, it was only Tetris at launch. Go ahead and prove me wrong, but in 1989, it was Tetris or nothing. Several accessories were also developed, including a carrying pouch, and printer, and camera, and fish detecting radar, and even more ridiculous third-party things. Despite being technologically inferior to its fourth-generation competitors, Sega's Game Gear, Atari's Lynx, and NEC's Turbo Express, the Game Boy received praise for its battery life, durability in its construction, and low cost. It quickly outsold the competition, becoming one of the most recognizable devices from the 1990s.
I'm sorry, sir. Your flight's been delayed. Cool.
Several redesigns were released during the console's lifetime, and production of the Game Boy continued until 2003, even after the release of its second successor, the Game Boy Advance, in 2001. Development. The Game Boy was designed by Nintendo's chief engineer, Gunpei Yokoi, and its Nintendo R&D 1 team. Following the popularity of the Nintendo Entertainment System, he held a meeting with Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, saying that he could do a handheld system with interchangeable games. The original internal code name for the Game Boy is Dot Matrix Game, referring to its dot matrix display, in contrast to the preceding Game & Watch series, which Yokoi had created in 1980, that has segmented LCDs pre-printed with an overlay, limiting each model to play only one game. So Game & Watch was what Tiger Electronic handheld games and other cheap game brands would become. It was like playing games on a digital clock screen. All the art is already drawn on the screen, and the illusion of movement comes from what parts of it are lit up. So this is just the LED segments, and the overlay is printed transparency. Really, the way these things looked on the outside were the best part of them. So aside from having a screen that could refresh, the goal was to make a console that could be small, light, durable, and have a recognizable library of games. Who named it the Game Boy? Apparently, Shigesato Itoi, director of Earthbound, which didn't exist yet, but that's how you would know who he is if you knew who he is, maybe. Anyways, he visited Nintendo and said, hey, call that thing Game Boy. The internal reaction to the Game Boy at Nintendo was initially very poor, earning it the derogatory nickname of Dame Game, in which Dame means hopeless or useless, Dame originating as a term used in the game Go, which meant meaningless territory. And then there came Tetris, the hot, not-so-new game created by Alexei Pajitnov in 1984 that many a Western game company was trying to get the rights to distribute. He's from Russia, by the way, and because of the inherent corruption and incompetence that's rampant in Soviet Russia, to this day, the government claimed full ownership of the game and did a real bad job at negotiating its rights. But despite all that, the game was ultimately bundled with the Game Boy. 10 years ago, we would have called that a killer app. Nintendo spent $10 million marketing the Game Boy. End of sentence. Hardware. The Game Boy has 4 operation buttons labeled A, B, Select, and Start, and a directional pad, which, if you're getting real folksy, you can call it the D-pad. There's a volume control dial on the right side of the device and a similar dial on the left side to adjust the contrast. At the top of the Game Boy, there's an on-off switch and the slot for inserting game cartridges. The on-off switch includes a physical lockout to prevent users from either inserting or removing a cartridge while the unit is switched on. Nintendo recommends users leave a cartridge in the slot to prevent dust and dirt from entering the system. And by the way, don't blow into cartridges or slots. If a game isn't working, you end up blowing spit particles in there and it causes corrosion. Use isopropyl alcohol and Q-tips, or these really pointy makeup applicators to get in there. So unless you've got a leaky battery in there that's corroding traces, cleaning the contacts works 99% of the time. If I do an NES video, I'm sure I'll be bringing that up again. On the left side of the system is an external DC power supply jack that allows users to use an external rechargeable battery pack, or AC adapter, sold separately, instead of 4 AA batteries, which, as the 90s wore on, rechargeable AA batteries would become more common. A 3.5mm stereo headphone jack is located on the bottom side of the unit, which allows users to listen to the audio with the bundled earbuds or plug into external speakers. I don't know when they were bundling what, but the original box shows earbuds and the headphone jack was the only way to get stereo sound. And apparently it came with a link cable in 1989. Kinda surprising, but it makes sense if they wanted to grow the ecosystem. Where do you plug that cable in? There's a port on the right side, and boom, 2 players, provided both users are playing games that support connecting to each other. The port can also be used to connect a Game Boy printer.
You can turn photography into photography.
Smile, you're on Game Boy camera.
The link cable was originally designed for players to play head-to-head 2-player games such as in Tetris. However, the link cable would later be used as a method of communication and networking in the popular Pokemon video game series.
So you can grab a link cable and a friend with a Game Boy, and with both game packs, you can catch them all. Gotcha!
Technical specifications. It's exactly this big and weighs almost half a pound. The screen is a 2.6-inch reflective super twisted pneumatic liquid crystal display. Game Boy isn't known for the greatness of its screen, but really all LCD screens of the time had issues with ghosting and poor viewing angles, or just not looking so great at any viewing angle. The Game Boy gets its criticism for not having a backlight, so you can't see anything in the dark. With a resolution of 160 by 144 pixels high at a very unique 10:9 aspect ratio, almost a square but a bit wider. With a frame rate of this many hertz and 2-bit 4 shades of gray, light to very dark olive green. Later the Game Boy Pocket would actually be black to white with 2 shades of gray. The CPU is a custom 8-bit Sharp LR35902, labeled as the DMG CPU. It combines a lot of components into one chip, including the Sharp SM83, based on a modified hybrid of the Intel 8080 and Zilog Z80 processors, running at 4.19 MHz. So the Intel 8080 is an early 1970s computer chip that was popular in the pre-DOS days. It was called CPM, and the Z80 basically copied the 8080 to be compatible, but added more stuff to become very popular in the entirety of the 1980s. So this is somewhere in between, with what I would assume would be power efficiency and small size being the focus. It has 4 sound channels, or tracks, 2 of which are pulse wave generators. One can do PCM 4-bit wave samples. So that's digitally recorded audio, really low quality. CD audio is 16-bit by comparison, so is this video. And one noise generator. And apparently the cartridge slot can be used as an audio input, but it never was for any production game, so moving on. The unit has only one speaker, however the headphone port outputs stereo sound, assuming the game supports stereo. 4 AA batteries gives it 15 hours of gameplay, or fish radaring. Maybe less, probably less. And yeah, there's a serial I/O for the link cable, that's input-output, 512 kilobits a second with up to 4 connections in serial. So you can play 2-player games with the cable, but there's a 4-player adapter released in 1990 called the 4-player adapter. You would think 4-player connections refers to that, but if it does, I don't think that's correct because the 4-player adapter did the legwork to make that networking possible. But it's a rare thing. Very few games supported it. I think they did it just because the Atari Lynx was doing it. And trying to be like some of the more expensive portables was a real overstep for the Game Boy. Revisions. Play It Loud, Special Edition. On March 20th, 1995, Nintendo released several special edition Game Boy models with colored cases, advertising them in the Play It Loud campaign, known in Japan as Game Boy Bros. Play It Loud units were manufactured in red, green, black, yellow, white, blue, and transparent. So it's the same internals, but the shells are different. So it's like the iMac before the iMac. Game Boy Pocket.
Hey, is that Bob?
Wow, he looks great.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, did you cut your hair?
I don't have any hair, Jim. He doesn't have any hair, stupid.
You dork.
You're sure looking thinner there, Bobby baby. Yeah, I dropped a few sizes.
Your screen looks bigger, too.
Not bigger, just a lot sharper. A lot sharper.
Take that new casing, Bob. Silver.
On July 21st, 1996, Nintendo released the Game Boy Pocket for $70 as a smaller, lighter unit that required fewer batteries. 2 AAA batteries, which provided approximately 10 hours of gameplay versus 15 hours of the original with its 4 AA batteries. So we're taking a loss on battery capacity, but power consumption remains the same. You've got the 6-volt original, and now you have the 3-volt Pocket at half the volts and double the amps. Why do that? Because that's how you make it smaller. The unit is also fitted with a DC jack, which can be used to power the system. The Pocket has a smaller link port, which requires an adapter to link with the older Game Boy. The port design is used on all subsequent Game Boy models, excluding the Game Boy Micro. The screen was changed to a true black and white display rather than the pea soup monochromatic display of the original Game Boy. Although, like its predecessor, the Game Boy Pocket has no backlight to allow play without a light source. It did notably improve visibility and pixel response time, mostly eliminating ghosting. The first version did not have a power LED. This was soon added due to public demand, along with the new Game Boy Pocket units of different colors, released on April 28, 1997. Game Boy Light. The Game Boy Light was released on April 14th, 1998, and only available in Japan. It was slightly bigger than the Game Boy Pocket and features an electroluminescent backlight for the screen. It uses 2 AA batteries, which gave it approximately 20 hours with the light off and 12 with it on. It was available in 2 standard colors, gold and silver. And that's the end. This is the original Game Boy. No Game Boy Color in this article. Launch games. The Game Boy was released alongside 6 launch titles: Alleyway, which was a Breakout clone, and Breakout was an Atari game designed by Steve Wozniak of Apple Computer Company right before said company existed. Like with many of the launch games, Mario is involved in it in some way. I had never played most of the launch games, so I was assuming they would be simple, generic games that wouldn't hold my interest. But really, they're simple, addictive games that work well on the platform. As you go through the levels, it increases the difficulty with tweaks to the gameplay mechanics. Baseball. Straight up, it is what it says it is. This one can be played 2-player. More than a little misleading, because Mario is the pitcher on the cover, but is only mentioned by name in the team list. I'm not saying they had to have Mario Baseball right out of the gate, but to put him on the cover and not have Mario or Luigi sprites in the game at all is deceitfully misleading. The Japanese box art does not do this, by the way. This is a port of the 1985 NES game, Baseball, and like with a lot of the portable versions of TV console games, is noticeably cropped, which is mostly an issue when a ball is hit to the outfield, because you're moving a player that you can't see to where the ball will be going, which you also can't see. As with the NES version, the computer player seems to have an advantage, but for 1989, baseball was a much more relevant sport and would have pulled in a lot of people who like baseball. Super Mario Land. Of course, they had to have Mario as a launch title, but this was not a Shigeru Miyamoto game, who is, for the most part, the steward of the franchise going back to Donkey Kong. It was directed by Satoru Okada and produced by Gunpei Yokoi. The physics are kind of wonky, movement doesn't feel as solid as previous Mario games, but it does look how you would expect Mario on Game Boy to be, and was definitely a desirable game to play. For me, the heavy gravity, or I guess you would say, more realistic gravity, is the hardest thing to get used to. I don't care for games where you hard fall off ledges. I like there to be some float. Compare that to Super Mario Land 2, a Miyamoto game, and you could see he even does a little leap when you run off platforms. And everything's bigger, so you're not aiming for these little targets. Tennis, another 2-player optional game. Surprisingly addictive, more engaging than baseball, and less generic than Alleyway. This would work really good with 2 players. They did a lot to push 2-player games, at least in the beginning, going so far as to include a link cable with the Game Boy, however often that was. This is a port of the 1985 NES game Tennis, so if the generic naming of sports games seems dated, that's why. And yes, Mario was in the original, as whatever you call him, the referee. The Game Boy version is cropped, but I think it works, and yeah, the NES version has a doubles mode where there are 2 extra computer players on the court. I think I like the Game Boy version better. Tetris! The game that knocked Mario out of the pack-in slot, but how? Did they think Mario Land wasn't good enough? Did they think everyone would buy the Mario game anyways? First of all, pack-in games were not the way they did things in Japan, so the decision was up to Nintendo of America president Minoru Arakawa, and he was advised by Hank Rogers, who is now the managing director of the Tetris company. But back then, he was the guy who negotiated the rights to Tetris on consoles. At the time, he said, a Mario game would promote the Game Boy to young boys, Tetris would promote it to everyone, and that's how it was. Everyone played Tetris. By the way, Alexei Paginov also runs the Tetris company, formed in 1996. Yes, the only way to succeed in Russia is to get out of Russia. So as far as Nintendo-developed versions are concerned, this came out in June-July 1989 on the Game Boy and November 1989 on the NES. So this was a Game Boy first game, and it's a shame that they couldn't get the 2-player function finished for the NES, but the Game Boy has 2 players. Today, NES Tetris has 2 players thanks to an infidelity ROM hack in 2012, by the way. but for the time, it was a disappointment, because really, it's a better looking game than Tengen Tetris. I don't know if that's a fact or just my opinion, but that game was 2 players, Tengen Tetris, and the music is bangin', with the finest electro-folk tunes. Nintendo NES Tetris doesn't have the song we've come to associate with Tetris. The Type A theme, Koro Bieniki. And last was Yakuman, a Japan-only Mahjong game. I don't know how to play Mahjong, and I can't read Japanese, so I have no idea what I'm doing here. Reception. Though it was technically less advanced than the Lynx and other competitors, notably by not supporting color or a backlight, the Game Boy's lower price along with longer battery life made it much more successful. By 1997, before the Game Boy Color's release in late 1998, 64 million units of the Game Boy had been sold worldwide. As of 2016, 119 million units of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color combined have been sold worldwide, making it the 3rd best-selling video game console of all time. What do you think the first 2 are? Take a guess. Okay, got your guesses? PlayStation 2 is number 1. It was a big deal because it had a DVD player in it, and Nintendo DS family, which I guess I'm surprised, but I don't know a lot about the DS. In 1994, at a press conference, Nintendo Vice President of Marketing, Peter Main, answered queries about when Nintendo was coming out with a color handheld system by stating that sales of the Game Boy were strong enough that it had decided to hold off on developing a successor handheld for the near future. In a 1997 year-end review, a team of 4 Electronic Gaming Monthly editors gave the Game Boy scores of, you know what, EGM? I got it from here. Game Boy worked because it was cheap enough to spur on adoption, and a lot of the best games embrace the simplicity of the hardware. Game Boy has about 1,000 games, and most of them probably aren't very good, but it was successful because of Nintendo's support. Being first to release a portable with a solid game plan about what they wanted to do with the console, Atari Lynx came out right after, but it also cost twice as much, $180 versus $90, and I don't think it had a packing game. NEC's Turbo Express came out a year later, but cost $250, again without a packing game, and was near non-existent outside of Japan. And then there was the Game Gear. It was late to the party, and at $150 it came with columns, and the momentum of Genesis's momentum, and all the Sonic the Hedgehog momentum, except Sonic wasn't a Game Gear launch title. It still cost more, used more batteries, and Sega didn't have a strong game plan for building its ecosystem. And yeah, Nintendo had developer lock-in, so if you wanted to make games for the Nintendo platforms, you weren't allowed to do it for competing systems. But that seemed to erode throughout the 90s.
It's me, Mario!
The point is, they were ahead in a lot of ways, and with the Game Boy, they stayed ahead. And that's the way it was.
Giving beats everything, and nobody beats the whiz.
If you've got a kid on your Christmas list, give them what they want. A new Game Boy from Nintendo. It's just $89. For Christmas, as always, nobody beats the whiz.
got 40 pounds burning a hole in your pocket? You could either buy a Game Boy like this or own a pair of pants like this.